Welcome. We're here live today talking with our friend Thomas Moore, author of Care of the Soul. And today we're talking about one of his latest books called The Ageless Soul. And tell us a little bit about the book and the whole ideas surrounding it.
Well, you know, Steve, I've been writing a lot of books since I published Care of the Soul 25 years ago. And I've been covering various aspects of life. That, in other words, Care of the Soul was kind of the basic introduction to the idea of soul. And then these other books I've written about work and sexuality and spirituality and relationships. So now that I'm in my 70s, it just seemed natural for me to explore aging. So that's what I did. And one of the first things I noticed when I first had the idea of writing about aging, I was in a store and I was in the section of cheeses, and I saw that the aged cheeses cost more than the ordinary cheeses. And I thought, well, that's an interesting idea, that aging, when it comes to some certain foods like wine and whiskeys and things like that too, they're more valuable when they get older, when they age. In fact, we age things in order to make them better. And I thought, well, I'd like to use that idea about us, about human beings. Is there some way in which aging actually means we're getting better?
It's quite different than, how we treat elders today. A lot of time elders get shipped off to Phoenix or Miami. And in the old days, the elders were like the center of the village.
Yes.
So that does kind of speak to what you're saying, that there's more value, there's more wisdom in older people. And I never looked at it as cheese, but where we move to now, a lot of people like their whiskey,
Yes.
or they like their scotch and,
Sure.
what barrel it's in, but the older, the better.
The older, the better.
Now, I have a question. Is it actually taste better, or is it just more rare, so it costs more or more valuable?
I think in terms of both cheese and whiskeys, and wine's a little more complicated, they're different. I don't know if they're better. It's about your own taste, but they're different. But I think you can taste the aging. You can taste that something has happened. That you go through time. You see, like, take a food like that. You don't just keep it away, put it away for, let's say, 18 years or whatever it is. And then you take it out and it's the same as when you put it away. It's different. And for a lot of people, I'd say the majority of people, both with cheese and whiskeys, they're better. They have more taste to them. They're usually a little sharper, and they have a little more complex taste than they did when they were very young, when they just started out. So I think that's a good metaphor, or maybe it's more than a metaphor. It's a law of life that when you give something some time, and under the right conditions, it's not just time, but under the right conditions, you end up with something that has a lot more complexity and more interesting. It's more interesting.
As far as humans go, there's certainly more wisdom there. There's more life lived. And my grandmother-in-law, my wife's grandmother, she is 99 now.
Wow.
And when she's living at home. She has care ever since Hurricane Sandy. She has full-time care, but she's 100% clear, but she goes in and out of it. But there is a little edginess to her. There is a little sharpness. There's a little bit, all of her friends are gone. So, but when you talk with her, there's a certain wisdom there.
Yeah.
And then she's 100% lucid, and she's ageless, and to that extent. But there is something like a whiskey gets sharper, is cantankerous the right word? I don't know if that's
Yes.
the right word, but there's a little edge to it. But there's certainly, in talking with her, she's seen so many things firsthand and has an opinion about it. So she's moving very slow, but after a minute or so, she'll focus in and you'll get nuggets of wisdom that, you're not going to find it on Wikipedia.
That's right. That's right.
Now that we kind of explored the subject a bit, what are some, you mentioned that in the book you talk about aging is different than getting older. So we talked about whiskeys getting older, but how does that affect, real life?
Yeah. I think that people can get older, and it doesn't mean that they're going to be wiser. It just doesn't work that way. It's not automatic. I think it depends on how you've lived. So aging then does take place from the very beginning, from day one, when you're born. You are beginning to age. And what happens, the way I see it, you go through experiences during your life, and how you manage them, how you navigate them makes all the difference. So let's say when you are, let's say you're a teenager and you're getting out of high school, how you manage that shift from high school to working life is going to affect how you age, how you become a person. Now, you may be afraid of life. Some people are afraid to take chances. And so they hide out. They just take the easy way all the time. The opportunities may come, but they don't take them because they don't want to take risks. I think that is really like saying, I don't want to age. And if you spend your life and you've had lots of opportunities and you haven't taken them, it seems to me when you get older, you're not going to have that wisdom because you haven't really lived. You won't have the character that you could have, or even have the opportunity and have what it takes to be a mentor to younger people then, because you haven't done it yourself. I don't think aging, really becoming a person over time, is automatic. You have to be a person who's willing to live. If you've really lived, then you've aged, and you've got something to offer them.
There's something I tell my boys. I have 15-year-old, 13-year-old. If you don't try, you can't fly. If you don't, and it's these cliches, variety is the spice of life. So there's a certain amount of exploration that probably leads to wisdom on some level, more deeper, richer life experiences. Now, I've did a lot of traveling before I got married, and now not so much. We kind of, we're doing our best to have a stable household, right, and rootedness. But no question, a certain amount of the travel that I've done in the past, I don't know if it's making me any wiser, but it certainly gives me a little bit more of a wide range of experience to, to reflect as I write, as I be a dad, as I, talk with you, those kinds of things. Right. Those kinds of things.
Right. That's a wonderful example, because that's what I'm talking about. If you travel, that's one way you have some experience, and it takes some courage, and at least for me it does, to travel. I don't travel too easily, although I've done a lot of it in my life. Traveling can be an important part of this development as a person, so it can aid you. And I think it's very interesting, and this was my point before, that you can have experiences when you were younger that carry over and still feed you when you're older. So you've had those experiences, not just way back in time, that your traveling is still with you in a way. It still gives you something and feeds you today. So that's what I'm saying. All these experiences, we age all life long. So when you're very young, you decide to travel. That means when you get older, that's going to be there as one of the things you've done to make your older years richer and where you have something to offer people.
Interesting, interesting. So again, so I think you're trying to draw a distinction between getting chronologically older and aging. I've heard this term, I don't know if I like it or not, but saging, you know.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
I don't particularly like it, but it speaks to having wisdom as you get older,
That's right.
as compared to just chronologically, you know, racking up more days, which is nothing wrong with that either.
No, not at all. No, that's, and also, I don't think you have to feel this is a big pressure on you, that you have to have these great experiences every day, or otherwise it's a waste of time. What I mean is that over time, there may be opportunities that come along and you take them and they really mean something to you. So for one person, it might mean very little travel and maybe a little bit of something else in life that really has a big effect on them. And other people travel all their lives and they really do it in a big way. You know, I've limited, for example, for myself, I've limited my travel. The farthest I've gone, I think, is Italy, probably from my home. And I go to Ireland about 3 times a year. I've been doing that for a long time. Like I have a family and I have friends and a life in Ireland. So I feel good about that. I feel good to go there and be connected with, maintain the friendships. But I don't want to go to India or even Greece or China. My wife does, but I don't want to do that. It's not me. It's just not something that I want to do in this lifetime. So what I'm saying is that I don't feel you have to do everything that's possible. You choose, and you kind of make an art of your life. You know, you choose to live your life the way you want to. You want it to be. But if you hold back, if you just don't do anything, or you don't do certain things that life offers you that might be important, it's going to have its effect when you get older.
So one of the concepts on this relatively new podcast, we're calling a Street Smart Wisdom, you know, different conversations with authors I've worked with and know over the years. So we're trying to take some of these concepts down to street level. Now, I'm really not sure what that means, but the idea is, you know, what is applicable to the average Joe on the street or the person living their life, you know, and even as a grandson or granddaughter, you know, how do you kind of not leverage, but learn from elders. And, you know, as someone getting older, you know, how do you can't hedge anything, but how do you enrich the quality of your aging? You know, what are some takeaways kind of in that realm?
Based on what I was just talking about, all of us have opportunities and every day in our everyday life where, let's say you're doing a job and you're comfortable in the job and you have an opportunity to go a step further or maybe even to try something new. This happens all the time. I mean, I think it happens, for me, I think this happens once a day. You know, something comes along that I can say yes to or no. Like talking to you, I could have said, no, you know, I don't think I'll take that chance. I won't do that. But I want to say yes more often to the opportunities that come along. And I think that's aging, as I understand it, because it means that you're living into life. Life makes you into who you are. It's not what you choose to do, it's the opportunities that come to you. And it takes a little bit of courage each time. Sometimes things take a lot of courage. Another way people do it too, and I'm not advocating this kind of thing at all, but sometimes as a therapist, I can say that people are in relationships, and very often I work with people in therapy who have been in a relationship that has not been good for them. It's been bad for them in many ways. But they stay in it for 10 years or 20 years, even though they feel they really should not. And then when they finally do, they're very happy that they finally made a choice for themselves. So when I go around signing books, going to bookstores. Once in a while, a person will come up to me and say, you know, we talked a few years ago and I decided finally to get out of that relationship. And I want to thank you for it. So that's, I really prefer that we all maintain our relationships, but there are times when you have to move and move on. And I think that's another example of aging where you have some courage, you build up the courage to do something, to make a difficult choice in life. And that's one of the big things that will move you ahead, I think, and make you age.
Right, and I think, you know, now that I'm a parent, there's a Hebrew word I've learned called Dogma, which is you have to set an example, you know, so children or younger people, the words that you say mean less than what you actually do. I think to a certain, words count, but by setting an example of going for it, and I know, and you know, I don't have to get psychological, but I know I have a certain set of things that I learned. My grandfather was in the Depression, and his whole mentality was, you know, survival. And look, he got me here. He was successful, but maybe there's another way to age, because now you pass down to your friends and family, you know, how you live your life.
That's it. That's a good way to put it. You pass down to your friends and family how you live your life. So how you live your life is really what aging is all about, how you live your life. So it's that's why I say, again, that aging is different from just letting the years go by, because if you've lived your life in a way that you've moved along, like you've really become something in the process because you have taken life on, you haven't tried to hide from it or move away from it. Then when you get older, you know, just think you have all those stories to tell. If you haven't done anything, you don't have any stories to tell. So, and if you have good stories, it means you've actually done something. And most of the things that we want to tell a story about are challenges. They're things we've gone through, and we've gone through them well. We got through to the other side. So we want to tell that story. It can be a very simple story, you know, about a trip we took somewhere and difficulties we ran into. But most stories, if you think about it, the stories we want to tell when we get older are those that involve a challenge of some kind that we were able to navigate and get through. So that tells you something about aging, I think. If you're going to give something to people when you get older, and that's a sign that you've lived, then you have to have gone through some experiences and, you know, take them on.
So two thoughts come to mind. One is, I have my Springsteen poster behind me. I was fortunate to see him on Broadway. He's going to be on Netflix soon. You should absolutely see it. You know, he was kind of like a street smart philosopher for me. So he just reminded me, there's this one song called "Glory Days." You know, in the and I'm paraphrasing, and I'm sure I won't get it 100% right, but and it has to do with aging. And you always go back to your glory days in high school, but you sit around getting older and you have nothing but boring stories to tell. So I think what you're kind of not advocating is, and I think it's also interesting, you could not leave your block and still and not be boring. Or you could go around the world, and I guess the converse is also true. There's a quality of living your life. And here's another thought that I had, and it has to do with alchemy. And I don't know, we both have worked in the past with James Hillman. And so how does aging as a human being have to do with alchemy, or is it not connected at all?
Oh, I think it's definitely connected. It's connected in the sense that your aging is like, well, I hate to go back to whiskey and cheese again, but you know, that's an alchemy that makes them become richer and more interesting. I think it's the same with us. You don't make yourself into an interesting person. you become an interesting person through a kind of alchemical process. Alchemy means something happens. You participate in it, but it's a natural process. And you have to help it along and observe it, but you don't actually push it. You don't make it happen. I think that's about, I certainly feel that way about my life. I don't want to go on about my life because I talk too much about it in my books, but I'll just give you one example. When I was, I always, at one point in my life, I really wanted to be a college professor. And so I got my PhD in religious studies and was teaching religious studies. And I loved it, really loved it. Loved being on the campus. And I thought I'm going to do this till the last day, I just want to do it the rest of my life. And one day the chair of the department called me in and said, we've decided not to give you tenure, which is like being fired. And I was shocked because I gave my all to that teaching. I knew that my approach was not exactly, liked by the other professors.
Okay.
But, it's my ideas. And Hillman had told me anyway, he said, when he heard I was going to start teaching, he said, you won't last long because you're talking about the soul and it doesn't work at a university. And it was true. And it was a shock to me. But I remember that day when he told me, I was sitting, he was a friend too, and he sat across from me and said, we're not going to give you tenure. And the first thought came to my mind was, well, what am I going to do with my life? Because this is what I've aimed at. I've given so much to this work. And what am I going to do? And he said, if you want, you can appeal this decision. But I had already, he said that, like my life changed in that second. When he said, you're not going to be a professor, that's what I heard, you're not going to be a college professor. So I said, it doesn't make any sense to me to appeal because, the words have been pronounced. I know that I'm changing now. I think that was a turning point for me. And I became a therapist and then started writing all these books, which I don't think I would have been able to do as a professor. So I was given a great deal of life in that moment, but it felt like loss. So it was like a real turning point for me. And I think that's an alchemy. It's like this thing, and I could feel it changing me. That's what alchemy does. It changes the substance. And you don't make it change. It just changes you because you've gone through the experience. And that's what I think about the alchemy of aging. It's a process. And it requires certain turning points where you really do go through a transformation and a change, which is exactly what's done in alchemy. Can I say one more thing about that? Alchemy, I've talked about this in my lectures. There's one process in alchemy called the yellowing process. They use colors a lot in alchemy. And there's a process called the yellowing, which is aging. So it's like if people come up to me with their books to be signed, when they bring up Care of the Soul, the pages are usually yellow. Mm-hmm. They're yellow, and everyone comments on them because they give me this book, and it looks like a really nice new book, but the pages are yellow because it's old. It's 25 years old. So that's how it works. So we all yellow. We all go through a process where we actually change in the color of our character and emotions and that kind of thing. Our emotional coloring changes. Our intellectual coloring changes. Our ideas change. So we go through this yellowing process, and so we're different later on. It's a beautiful thing. It's a natural process.
Right, and that's kind of takes it all home or back to full circle, so to speak, in terms of, what does alchemy or aging have to do with real life living? And old books on your shelf, they yellow, they age. And now it's a whole separate conversation. If you never open the book, some people, you have to read the book. I
Yeah,
get.
that's
I'm not sure, that's relevant.
No, not every book, but most books, yeah.
No, but I like that. So, okay. So any other takeaways or main points about the book before we wrap this segment up?
Sure. There are a lot of things we haven't talked about. One of them is that people are interested in is retirement. There's a lot to be said about that, but I could say just a couple words. One is that I see, the way I see it is that we all have a life work. We have something to do in our lives, and it can take different forms. So the job we have and the career we have is really important and central, but it's maybe only one form of our life work. And when you retire, you don't have to see that as the end. A lot of people do. I just heard the other day about some people these two guys who retired, and they're falling apart because they don't know what to do with their lives. Well, I think that's because they think it's the end, or that they've finished their career, they finished their work. They haven't. And I give the example in this book, a very interesting one to me, of a lawyer who loved his law practice and loved doing it, but then he retired. And by accident, more or less, by fate, came to him that he got this job where he was helping young musicians perform in people's homes. And he steered them and he helped them do it he could use his legal knowledge to help them set up their work, their business, and so on, and encourage them to do it. And he was very, very active, hands-on in helping these musicians. And he told me that was really, in a way, more of his life work than the law he had practiced all those years. And I think that's a good example. You have to be open to a new thing that can come along. And sometimes it takes some time and some real insight to see how it is part of your life work, because it may not look like it at first. But I think this man, when he looks back on it now, he can see that this was a good transition for him to go from practicing law to helping these young musicians.
Wow. And never, one door, it's another cliche, but one door closes and another door opens.
That's right, exactly.
And well, okay, so you covered that in the book. Anything else in the book that?
Yes, one thing very interesting to me is that there's a natural intensification of your spiritual life. And by that I mean is that people are, when they get older, they're not moving around quite as fast usually as they were before. They can enjoy a walk in nature, or to be in a park, or to do some gardening, or have more of a contact with the natural world, which I think is the best way to develop your spirituality. I get that mainly from I've read so much of Thoreau, of Henry David Thoreau, who writes about the spirituality of nature, being in nature. And so that's one way. Another way is that older people then can get involved in service. They can do things for other people now that they have some time. And that service can be part of their spiritual life. I think today I think it's a very bad idea. Today we tend to equate spirituality with meditating. I think that's a bad thing to do. The spiritual life as for millennia has been also involved in ethics and giving something to the world and being of service. So I think that's another thing that's very natural to the spiritual life when you get older. So I think that you can intensify your spirituality as an older person, but it's a natural thing. It's like, this is what you can do now. It's the time of life to do it in this way. You don't have to go searching for the answers. Now it's time to just enjoy what you have found and discovered, and teach others, do some service, and have a contemplative life.
No, I like that because, all the other metaphors, it's the end of the line, you're done, so this is, I got it. So can I see can you have the book handy? I don't have one here, or else I would.
Yes, I have one. I better have one handy.
I would think you have more than one, but so say something so the camera goes to you.
So this has this nautilus shell on the cover, and that's it. That's an image of this. This shell grows in size, but it doesn't change in its structure. And we're like that, I think. we grow older, but we are essentially the same. So we are ageless and timeless, even as we go through time.
That's a perfect place to end. Okay, Thomas, thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve. We really enjoyed speaking with you.
Absolutely.